Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to our training today, brought to you by Switchboard. My name is Madina Masumi. I am one of Switchboard's training officers with a focus on youth and education. And I've joined a Switchboard with a background as a licensed K through 12 school counselor. Previously, I also worked as a case manager for many public assistance programs. And I also bring with me firsthand experience the challenges of refugee integration as the daughter of Afghan refugees. I'm excited to be here with you all today, and let's get started with our training. So for today, we have three learning objectives for you. And the first one is going to be explain how the dual capacity building framework supports the development of family engagement strategies, policies, and programs in school communities. The second is we are going to describe culturally responsive strategies to enhance family involvement for working with newcomer students and their families. And the third is we are going to apply some practical tools and techniques to establish and maintain effective partnerships between schools and refugee families. All right, so the dual capacity building framework, in this section, we're going to dive in and learn about this framework model. It was first published back in 2013 by Karen Mapp with the support of Paul Kuttner. And there's actually been many updates made to the framework back in 2019. And the reason this framework is so important to the field of family engagement and why we're going to talk about it in depth today is because it really focuses on building the capacity of both families and educators rather than putting all the responsibility into one party. All right, we are going to start you out with a Slido. If you can scan the QR code on the left side of your screen, or you can go onto slido.com and enter the corresponding number, which is 3438919. We'd love for you to answer, what is your definition of family engagement? Okay, I see some participants typing. involvements of family in decision making, collaboration and communication with all members. Families feel empowered, building a positive experience, actively involved in their child's education. Again, getting involved, ensuring they have cultural orientation. Awesome. Lots of wonderful answers coming through. Lots of focus on how it helps families, right? And how it helps families get involved in their child's education. So, family engagement really happens when families and schools are working together to support their child's learning and their development. And it really has a big focus on building those strong, respectful relationships between families, between educators, and of course, bringing in the community to ensure that everyone is vested in the child's education. So, it's really like a multi-tiered approach. And so these are all wonderful answers. Thank you so much. All right. And before we talk about the dual capacity framework, we're going to sort of talk about the guiding beliefs of family engagement. And these are really going to sort of ground us. And this is important, especially in the context of today's training, because we're focusing on newcomer and refugee families. And so, of course, the first is that families want the best for their child, right? And so, every family, regardless of their background, they want the best for their child. And starting with this belief really helps us build positive trust and positive relationships with families. The second is that families can help their child succeed, right? So, families play a really important role in their child's success. They're going to influence the way their child learns, the way their child behaves in the classroom. And our role is really to empower families with the tools that and support that they need to contribute effectively. And then the last is that families are the experts of their child, right? They have the best insight on their child. And so their insight is so valuable to educators. We really have to listen and respect their knowledge to make informed decisions that benefit the student. And again, this is even more important when we're thinking in the context of newcomer families, because they are going to have different cultural beliefs than what is, possibly the beliefs or values that are in their child's school. So it's really important to hone in on that and get their voices heard. All right. So, when we are thinking about families' role in accelerated learning, this information is actually coming to us from the Flamboyant Foundation. They are a nonprofit organization that's done a lot of great work that's research and evidence based in the field of family engagement. And what it's telling us is that families are the ones who are going to be able to communicate those high expectations to their child. They are able to talk to their child about the hopes, the dreams that they have, and goals that they have for their children in the future. And they usually link that to educational success, right? Families can monitor their child's performance. They can be the ones who help keep track of their child's progress, whether it's through checking their grades, talking to them about what assignments are due, or at home, helping them find ways to properly manage their time and balance all the school and work and home activities that they have. And of course, families help accelerate learning by supporting their learning at home, right? Creating an environment that's conducive to learning, making sure their child has a place in the home where they can do homework, where they can study. They are the ones at home with their child, not the educators. So it's very important to make sure that they feel empowered. And of course, guiding their child's education, right? Parents are involved in all the decisions that their children make from a young age, and especially as they get older when it comes to seeking out colleges or enhancing their education after K through 12. And the hope is that as their child matures, they will place more of that responsibility on their child. So these rules are really foundational in ensuring that students can succeed academically, with each role contributing uniquely to the development and learning of their child. And as we're going through today's presentation, I also want to note that I want to clarify that for when it comes to talking about newcomer students in schools, they might not necessarily be with their biological families. So some are in foster care as unaccompanied refugee minors, and so I might add that additional context, and I want us to keep that in mind as well. Is that not all children are going to be in their traditional biological families? So even when we're working with foster care agencies or children are in a transitional home, it's important to think about this context of how they can also work to um, partner with schools. All right, so benefits of family engagement specifically for refugee youth. Obviously, that is our focus for today. When we talk about education in the US, we often talk about achievement gaps, which are so important. But when it comes to refugee students, it's really important to recognize that there's also what's called an opportunity gap, right? So some refugee students may have had breaks in their education. They might not have had the same opportunities as their peers. So, when it comes to refugee families, one of the aspects that we focus on of why family engagement is so important is because it helps close the achievement gap and the opportunity gap. And when families are engaged, that leads to higher literacy rates among students. There's going to be higher test scores and academic achievement overall. Attendance rates are better. There's going to be fewer disciplinary problems in schools. And of course, they'll have stronger social skills. And students are also more likely to go ahead and pursue a higher education. And really, when it comes to newcomer students and refugee students, all of these are so important because these are uphill battles that many of them are facing. Of course, supporting their acculturation and their integration, right? So when they feel more included in the school, when their families feel more engaged, these are all major benefits that you're going to see with newcomer students that are so important. All right, so this is the dual capacity building framework, sort of the layout that we have. Again, this framework has become a very influential model through the years because it's research-based and it's evidence-based, specifically on how to support the development of successful family engagement strategies, policies, and programs. And like I said in the beginning, the framework really comes with the lens of supporting and equipping families and educators because if too much is placed, too much responsibility is placed on families or on educators to be engaged and support their child, it's not really fair. So the great thing about this framework is that it says, hey, both parties, all parties need to be invested to really help the child. And in the context of parent engagement or family engagement, the framework really focuses on building the skills, the knowledge, and the relationships that are necessary for this successful collaboration. And it has four essential parts that we're going to break down in the next slides to come. They're addressing capacity challenges. So what's getting in the way of families engaging? Essential conditions, which talk about the process and the outcomes necessary to have an effective family engagement program, and then program policies and goals. And we're going to focus on the 4 C's. And then, of course, the results of effective family engagement. What are the capacity outcomes? All right, so challenges, capacity challenges in family engagement. This again helps us understand what is getting in the way of families engaging with schools. Some of the reasons are that school staff and families just don't have the opportunities to build this partnership. They don't have the capacity to do it. It's no surprise in the world that we live in today, educators have so much on their plates. They're very overwhelmed, and they sometimes might see a family engagement initiative as extra work, right? And it's just might be an added pressure that they might not see the value in necessarily. So they don't want to take that time to do it. Really, in the long run, we know that if families are more engaged, they become partners, and it actually helps educators so much. They also might not have the the training to work with newcomer families. This involves really understanding cultures, having cultural humility, and they might have not had that professional development on how to reach out to families. In my own experience, working in the public school system, I sometimes would hear teachers say, "Oh, those families don't ever show up. They don't come to the meetings or they don't attend these events." But the reasoning behind it was not always known, right? And so it's really important for us to know why. Maybe it's transportation, maybe it's a language barrier. And so when educators don't have that capacity or training to understand those things, this can get in the way of engagement. And then the last capacity challenge is that families might not understand their role in family engagement or lack the communication with the school. Um, we're going to talk about this more later, but of course, in some cultures, they might see the school and what happens at home as two completely separate entities. So they might not feel like they need to be involved in the school. I know my own family is from Afghanistan, and what happened at school and what happened at home were kept very separate. So that was a big transition and learning curve for my own family when I started because my parents didn't understand how involved they had to be in my education until I really got into kindergarten and they began to understand the effects that it was taking when they weren't as involved. An important note that I want to say for URMs is that URMs may not have family or siblings here to support them. So their family setting might not know how best to support, the child to succeed in school, and it may take time, extra time for foster homes or case managers to really learn ways to foster a unique success for URM. So that's an important thing to consider when working with them. All right, essential conditions. So to explain essential conditions in the dual capacity building framework, in a simple way, I think of it as a set of building blocks, kind of like we have the image here, that are needed to really create an effective partnership between schools and families. The collaboration between families and schools has got to be meaningful. It's got to be culturally relevant, and it has to be relational, right? Built on trust. And the students, it has to also connect to student learning. So every initiative, every activity that is planned with family engagement, you have to really think about, is this going to help student learning in the long term? Because evidence shows over and over that if it's not connected to student learning, it's not going to be effective. And actually, families don't buy into it as much. Again, it has to be culturally responsive and collaborative, right? So getting families involved. So when an effective process is in place, you're going to have outcomes that are systemic, integrated, and sustained, right? So what does that mean? Systemic means that the practices and strategies for family engagement are going to be embedded across the education system. It's not going to be just in one school. It's going to be district wide or even statewide. It's really going to be woven into everything that the school does. And integrated again means that it ensures that family engagement is connected to all the key areas in the school. For example, curriculum development. Even in curriculum development, you could think of ways of how are we going to engage families in this learning. And I'm going to give examples of this later when we get into section 3 on specific strategies. And then sustained, right? It's got to be something you can do long term. It's got to be something that it's not just like a one and done. It's something that it's not just like a one time event. It's something that really can happen over time that you can build on and continue to evolve. So those are the process and the outcomes necessary. And then on this slide, policy and program goals of family engagement. An effective family engagement program will build and enhance on these 4 C's that you see on the slide, both for staff and for families. And so capabilities is the first one, right? And this is skills and knowledge that are necessary for effective engagement. What does that really mean or look like? So this includes like human capital skills, your knowledge. So for example, for educators and administrators and staff, they should know who their families are. They should know who their students are, including the challenges that they are facing. Families, on the other hand, might learn how to navigate certain nuances within a school. They might learn how to check their child's grades online and to navigate all those confusing tech systems that schools have. Connections, those include important relationships and networks or social capital. For example, staff and families should have strong access to cross-cultural networks and build them on trust and respect, right? Confidence. This includes an individual's level of self-efficacy on their belief and on their capabilities. So all of the programs and initiatives that happen in family engagement should really build confidence and have families and educators come to a point where they're like, yeah, I can be involved in this. I can make a difference. I can engage with the school. And it really builds up on their confidence. Cognition. This includes a person's assumption and their beliefs and their worldviews. So, for example, earlier when I was talking about teachers who feel like, oh, family engagement, I don't have time for that, or it's not a part of my job. They come around and they understand. They begin to sort of build on their cognition of why it's important and why it is actually helpful. And similarly, parents if parents think that it's the school's job alone to educate their child, they may be less likely to provide at-home support. This changes when they have more cognition and awareness of the value of family engagement. So the goal is for these four C's to be met, right? And so capacity outcomes, right? So last but not least, if a school partnership is following the dual capacity framework model and things go as planned, it leads to successful family and school partnerships where both educators and families feel empowered and and connected to the learning, right? And so for educators, uh, this involves thinking about opportunities when they can create partnerships with families and have them be a part of their child's educational journey, but also focusing on their child's social, emotional, and behavioral development. Engaging families as co-creators while honoring their funds of knowledge. That means that educators learn to collaborate effectively with families. They're really leveraging the family's insights and the strengths that the family brings to support the students. Because remember, we said as a guiding belief that families know their child best. So how can we really extract that knowledge from families? How can we get them to share that wisdom with us? And this includes, of course, involving families in the decision-making processes. Even things like co-creating a behavior plan for a student who might need it. Get the family's insight. Are they using something similar at home? What works well? What doesn't? That can actually help alleviate a lot of stress along the way, and you might come to a more effective system of supporting the student faster when you're co-creating. And of course, creating welcoming cultures, right? Educators develop a deep understanding and respect for cultural backgrounds through effective family engagement. They know who their students and families are. They know about the experiences they've been through if they're newcomers. They're really doing a lot of listening and creating a welcoming school climate for them. All right. Families gain a better understanding on how school systems work, right? That's the result that we want. They understand policies, they understand practices and expectations, and they feel really empowered to navigate the system more effectively. So, what do these mean, right? So, families get into these diverse roles as co creators. So, again, that's an example of they're working with educators to plan things like even curriculum, school events. Again, that behavior plan that I was talking about earlier. Families as supporters, what does that mean? Well, they are supporting their child's emotional, academic, social growth. They're creating a home environment that helps encourage learning and growth. And then families as encouragers, they are their child's biggest cheerleader, right? They're celebrating the successes and they're helping their child overcome challenges. Families as monitors, right? They are tracking their child's progress. They're involved. They know how to check those confusing systems for grades and report cards and emails, and they have access to resources and support if they need it. And then families as advocates, they are feeling empowered to speak up on behalf of their child's needs and their child's rights. You really want a family to get to the point where they feel like this because, again, they know their child best. And so they are even ensuring that their child is receiving all the appropriate services that they need. And families as models, families serve as role models for their children. They are going to be the ones who are demonstrating behaviors and attitudes and values that will last with their children for a lifetime. So this is sort of the outcomes that you want from an effective family engagement program. This is what you want to see from educators. This is what you want to see from families if the program is going successfully. So this is actually, you all, how the dual capacity framework model looks. So if you Google this, if you want to learn more about this framework model, when you do, this is how the model looks. There's a website called dualcapacity.org that you could learn a lot more about it. The reason that I broke it down in the slides that you saw previously in the way that I did is that I feel like it's an easier way to explain the model rather than just looking at this at a glance. But I just wanted you guys to see this visual because this is what you will see if you want to learn more about it. All right, we are going to move on to our second section on building bridges with newcomer families and really understanding what newcomer families or refugee students are coming in with and why cultural humility is so important. And the reason is that, oh, actually, let's go ahead and do this, Slido. In your opinion, why are family engagement initiatives increasingly important when working with refugee and newcomer populations? So I'll give you guys a second to do this second Slido. Helping families feel welcome, building culturally relevant, diverse programs, building trust, self-sufficiency, feeling included. They can see familiar faces, building community, reducing confusion. Families feel understood. So, yeah, a lot on trust, right? Builds trust, support. I see a lot on building trust in communities. Yeah. Thank you guys. Yeah, we saw that in that first section about the reasons why family engagement initiatives are so important in general. And I think that if for people who work with newcomers or refugees, I think we understand it. We see why, of course, why is it so important for them to feel connected in their child's education? Um, and I definitely think that newcomers are already facing so many stressors. Actually, we're going to get on that right here in the next slide. Thank you guys for these wonderful responses. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about core stressors of newcomer students and families. So families that are coming in to schools have already gone through so much in their migration journey, right? There are stressors that they may have faced before they even left their home country, beginning, of course, with trauma that they may have been exposed to. Of course, we know with refugees, they are leaving not because they want to, it's because they don't have a choice, right? They're forced to flee their countries, and there's so much that they go through in their journey before they even set foot on to the final home of where they resettle. So they may have been exposed to war, they may have been exposed to loss of loved ones. And so we really have to take that into account because all the trauma that our students go through, they're bringing that with them into the schools, and that's going to affect their ability to adjust. All right. And then a culture of stress, right? Once newcomers are arriving into our schools, they're facing all of these challenges of adapting into a brand new culture that's completely unfamiliar to them, while they're navigating an entirely different educational system. And of course, at home, they might be having even more conflicts with their families. Families are stressed out as well. There might be shifts in family dynamics. We know that students and children tend to sort of integrate at a quicker rate than their families, and that can cause tension as well. And then, of course, there are the resettlement stressors that families are facing. They're trying to navigate learning a new language. There's a lot of financial barriers. Families are trying to get a job, they're trying to get into stable housing. And so they are facing all of these different stressors, and it's difficult for them to sort of adjust. And then the last one is isolation, right? Students already who are coming in have lost so much of their social support system. They might not feel like they belong. The differences in cultural norms can add to that. And so there might be a big feeling of disconnect. And when we're thinking about URM students, really they have their own unique set of stressors as well, because they have no family ties, no family support. So that's even an important thing to keep in mind when working with them. And so when you see this, when you see all of these things that newcomer students are coming in with, it's really gives us a good, even deeper understanding of why is family engagement even more important for this population, because they may be facing all of these or some of these at the very bare minimum. All right. Practicing cultural humility, right? Why is that such a key piece here when we're working with newcomers? Really, cultural humility, the biggest thing we have to understand, it's a lifelong learning process. It's not, we can never come to a point, it used to be called cultural competence, but competence sort of makes it sound like you get to a arrival point of then you know. But if educators and schools understand the importance of cultural humility, that's a really key piece when working with newcomers. And one of those things is to focus on individuals, right? Recognize and value each family's unique background and experiences. We can bring up the points for this slide on cultural humility. And then avoid making assumptions, right? Ask questions to really understand families, their perspectives, their needs. Don't make assumptions. I think this is something that's, as educators, from my own experience, sometimes we are quick to make assumptions about families. Like I said earlier, when teachers think, oh, that family, they never participate in the parent meetings or they never show up. Why aren't they showing up? If we understand the previous slide, if we understand the trauma that they've been through, or the fact that they have a language barrier or a transportation barrier, that really helps us dig deeper to understand and avoid making those assumptions. Practice active listening, right? This is so important for educators because we love to talk, right? We love to teach, we love to talk. But really, as equally important as that, maybe even more important, is to listen to our family's needs. What do they want? What are they trying to to teach us? And I think that that really helps also when they're entering our scope, for us not to come across as intimidating. When we're listening more and we're learning more, it's less intimidating. And then, of course, I already emphasized on prioritize learning and keeping an open mind. That's a key piece of cultural humility. It's that lifelong learning piece. And establish personal connections with families. even if it's something so small, families will remember that. I used to try to do that all the time with newcomer families, with all families as a counselor. Find something that you have in common, whether it's a song that you both like, whether it's a color that you both like when it comes to students or even families, because people remember those connections and you can build on that and you can build trust on that. So this is super important because if you have all these family engagement strategies in a school or a community organization, but you're not practicing cultural humility, there's going to still be a huge disconnect. It's not going to effectively work. You have to understand how to reach out to newcomer families by meeting them where they're at and practicing cultural humility. It's a key piece, really, that I can't emphasize enough. All right, we can move on. So, another thing when working with refugee youth and families is that you are going to always want to use professional interpreters. The reason that I say professional interpreters is because sometimes schools can get in the habit of using even school staff to interpret things if they speak the same language as a family member. But that might not necessarily be the best, case scenario. Of course, we never want to use students. We never want to use students to interpret to their families in any type of a setting. That puts a lot of pressure on the child, and it actually takes away a certain amount of power from the parent too, or the family. So we don't want to do that. We also want to respect different communication practices. What I mean by that is that some cultures communicate more non-verbally than verbally. They might, have different mannerisms for communication. They have different styles. Some make more eye contact, some make less. Really get to know the families you're working with, and understand the role and how they tend to communicate. Understand the role of collectivism. This is really key because, as we know, in the U.S., we're an individualistic culture, right? It's more on the focusing on each student, on each child, which of course we want to do. But there are so many cultures where the families, it's all hands on deck. It takes a village approach. So you might be meeting one day with the aunt, you might be meeting one day with the older cousin who goes to the school, who is giving you some type of insight on the family. And rather than us jumping to conclusions or judging, we have to understand the role that different uh, of collectivism in different cultures, and really be open to that. And of course, partnering with community organizations, cultural brokers, and refugee agencies. This is going to be huge when working with your newcomer families to really get the buy-in and get them engaged into the school. So find unique ways to do that as well. All right. So, creating culturally inclusive schools, there's lots of different things that can be done both on a classroom level and a school level to make sure that we are practicing our cultural humility. In a classroom level, there's create lessons that align with the students' interests. So this really requires knowing your students, right? Knowing what they're interested in, knowing what their background is like, and finding opportunities to be able to share that with everyone in the class so that they can also learn, bridge between American and newcomer culture, and explain school routines like after school events to families. This is really an important one. In the classroom level, we always like to talk about a literacy concept called mirrors and windows. And so that goes align with saying, have in your classroom library, for example, have books that are mirrors where students can see themselves, their own culture, their beliefs, their backgrounds in the books that they read, but then also offer windows, right? So also allow them to look out and learn about someone else's culture, someone else's beliefs. And so, really, that's an example of sort of bridging that gap between cultures, having all the students in the class learn and reflect on them about themselves, but also about others. Explaining routines, I think that's really important for newcomer families because when there's after school activities, a lot of times newcomer families have certain expectations. Their child's going to arrive at a certain time. They're not going to understand the need or, there needs to be some buy-in for the after school activities and events. And so really communicating that to family or the importance of that is going to be super important on a school-wide level or a district level. Make sure that you have practices that are accommodating for religious or cultural traditions that schools have. Make sure that your staff is reflecting your student population. So make sure that there's diverse staff members, but also that there's a lot of initiatives on training on cultural humility and avoid school jargon as much as you can, right? We know for anyone who works in the education realm that we use a lot of jargon and a lot of acronyms and a lot of confusing words. And for newcomers, this can sound like a completely different language. I know that's something that my family struggled with so much, and it was very difficult for them. So please try to avoid that because that makes people feel like they're not well equipped to understand what's happening in schools. All right, gonna move on. So, this is stages of newcomer involvement. According to two experts in the field of family engagement by the name of Han and Love, there are four stages of immigrant parent involvement. And the more schools know about why each newcomer family came into the US, what their hopes and aspirations are, and how well prepared they are to partner with the schools, the better schools are positioned to help families transition to a new school and culture. And what Han and Love imply is that immigrant parents really move through four stages of parent involvement. And the first is cultural survivor, right? And so, cultural survivor may be recently arrived immigrants. Many will be really concerned about they might be going through those stressors that I talked about in a couple of slides earlier. They might be thinking about where they're going to live, how they're going to provide for their family. They're just in that survival mode, trying to learn the basics of how to navigate a US school system, just trying to figure out how to even enroll their kids in school. The second is cultural learners. Cultural learners are going to feel a little more comfortable with the school system and may want to learn more about what is taught in the school, what the culture is like in the school. They might be a little more comfortable attending some workshops as long as it's in their native language or they have interpreters available. And they probably will be likely to participate in parent conferences with some language support. The third is the cultural connector. This is when families are becoming more familiar, even with educational terminology, with policies, with procedures. They may wish to work with cultural survivors and learners to help them and encourage them to understand more and be a part of school programs and activities that support their children and their parents. And then we have cultural leaders at that top of that pyramid. And these are the people in the school, the parents and the families that often become the voice of their cultural their ethnic and their language community. They are even the ones that are the advocates for parents that are in the other stages. They might be the ones leading some of the trainings and workshops for parents that are really helping them navigate the nuances in school systems. All right. What do you guys think are some ways that schools can support and encourage families to become cultural leaders? While you guys are answering this question, that pyramid diagram really makes me reflect a lot on my mom. When I went to school here in kindergarten, she at the end of kindergarten, I couldn't even write my name properly. My fine motor skills were very poor, and she didn't know that the importance of her and my father being sort of partners with the school, like I said, with the engagement. And so she worked her way up that triangle. And I always think of by the time 12 years later, my younger sister was in kindergarten, my mom actually did a presentation for the school about Afghanistan and talking about our culture. So she really moved her way up that pyramid and became more involved because she became more comfortable. I see professional interpretation as a must, supporting those immediate needs, making them feel included, putting out a survey, more trainings, having after school programs, inviting families to tell their stories. That's very powerful. Equal opportunities for parent volunteering. We're going to talk more about that in a bit. Our school has a culture night. More informed teachers. Thank you guys so much. All right. Let's move on to our third section on strengthening partnerships between schools and newcomer families. So, in this section, we're going to talk about specific strategies and tools and initiatives that work really well for a high family engagement. All right. And we're going to start you guys out with one other Slido. Can you guys share an example of a family engagement initiative that you believe creates a high impact? By high impact, I mean like it makes an oomph. It really gets families engaged. It's successful. Yes, home visits. We are going to talk about that. No phones and socializing with families during lunch and meal times, showing we care about their beliefs, monthly orientation workshops, adult ESL classes that are free for the community. Laptop drives. Wow, that's nice. I don't know that everyone could afford that, but that's cool. Tours of the school before children start, recognizing holidays, multicultural events. This is wonderful. More on home visits. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about um, strategies that are impactful on student learning. All right. So, for anyone here working in the school, or even if you work in the community-based organizations, schools plan a lot of events, right? And organizations like the PTA really help support these initiatives. And while the events have different reasons and different purposes, some of these initiatives don't really give that high impact on engaging families. This doesn't necessarily mean that we should avoid them altogether, but if our goal is to get families to get more connected to the school, it's really an important consideration. All right. So we have sort of the spectrum of low impact activities to all the way to high impact. Low impact strategies are often things that are school led, right? They might involve one-way communication, like reaching out to our families through a newsletter or an email, right? We think like, oh, we're emailing out the whole family. Everyone should know about this. But how often are families actually reading them? How often do they understand what they're reading? So these really are activities or initiatives that are meant to inform families or to educate families rather than to engage families. And actually, this includes events like PTA meetings or even fundraisers. Another one that really surprised me when I initially learned about this is parent volunteers. And this is because if parent volunteers are disconnected from the learning and focus more on things like cutting out shapes for teachers or making copies of something for teachers, this is going to have really a minimal effect on student achievement. Now, if parent volunteers are doing some type of activity in the classroom, for example, like helping the teacher with a math or literacy block, that's more targeted. That's actually more high impact and it's helpful. So I don't want to discourage, anyone from parent volunteers as a high impact activity, but we have to be careful about how we're utilizing parent volunteers. High impact strategies are more often learning focused. They can sometimes be individualized, but not necessarily. And they're going to help build relationships and and support academic achievement. And the key piece of high impact activities is that they are getting families involved in that learning process. Some examples of high impact strategies, and one of my absolute favorites are community walks. Um, and this is something that I did every year. I worked as a school counselor. 1 week prior to school starting, we would create like teams of teachers that were like in 3 and 4 so that nobody was alone. And so each teacher would go with a specialist. So, for example, I, as a counselor, would tag along with a classroom teacher and maybe one other specialist, and we would visit that teacher's entire class. We would walk through the neighborhood. It was like a community walk, and we would visit their class, say hello, give them like a pencil, and they would see their teacher that day and find out who their teacher was. We would not allow to go inside the family's home. Some districts are very strict about that. That's why home visits are not even a practical option for some districts. But there's ways to get around that. Another example of a really high impact activity is interactive projects or homework, where it requires students to really go home and discuss what they're doing with their family, or even get their family to help them. Sometimes this is things like creating a family tree, or things that really engage families to participate with their child. And the really powerful part about this type of an activity is that parents don't even have to be in the school. They don't have to take off time from work and go to the school. It's something that they're doing with their child, and they're engaged in their child's learning. They know exactly what's happening in the classroom. So this is so ideal for newcomer families because we know that they have a lot of limitations when it comes to activities that are going to require them to come into the schools. And of course, another high impact strategy is anytime schools find ways to share data with families about students' skill levels, and how they're doing, whether it's part of an assessment, and really helping newcomer families understand this assessment. Like for my family or families I've worked with in the past, it's kind of confusing to say, oh, this is our beginning of the year and then our mid-year and then our final. Like, what does that mean? So really breaking those things down, but sharing data with families, and this concrete numbers can also be very helpful. All right. Can move on to the next slide. And again, this is just like a overview for you guys, again, on some of the higher impact initiatives that schools can offer. I'm going to be talking more in detail about a few of these in the next slides, specifically home visits and family liaisons and family workshops. And of course, the adult English classes listed on here can also be part of the workshops, and that's a wonderful strategy. But I did want to touch on the community schools briefly. What are community schools? Well, these are public schools that act as a hub for the community. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because this is a super great strategy, or I guess initiative, to have for newcomers, because what it does is it finds ways to bring the community into the school. And really, the school is like this community hub. So, for an example, um, a dental office that's in the community may have like a specific week where they offer screenings for children and come and allow children to do checkups. Or, for example, in the school that I worked at, the local YMCA would actually utilize our school gym after school hours to provide after school daycare, actually at low or no cost to many families. And so finding ways to have the community come into the school, and create like this like hub where everyone's working together. This is a really powerful strategy, or initiative, I guess I should say. If you want to learn more about community schools, you can search a Google search coalition for community schools, and you get a lot more information about that. All right. Home visits, right? So home visits can be very helpful to do if you are allowed in the beginning of the school year. That's a great time to do it. Again, because so many districts are not allowed to do it, there's really creative ways to work around this. For example, the idea that I talked about earlier of the community walk, right, where teachers buddy up and drop something off to a student, or even something like picking up the phone as a teacher and calling families at the beginning of the school year is really helpful. Introducing yourselves, maybe having a couple questions you want to ask. What this does is it's very tailored and it really helps right off the bat get to know your families. It builds trust. One of the questions that a lot of teachers asks are, what are your hopes and dreams for your students? That's always a great question to ask to gauge a lot of information for families. And there's a direct connection between home visits or even those community walks and higher attendance rates and higher literacy rates. So that is a very powerful tool for family engagement. All right. All right, the next slide is family liaisons. They're sometimes referred to as cultural brokers, and these are my favorite people at a school. They're usually school-based, and they play such a strong critical role in really strengthening connection between families and schools. This really leads to a higher level of engagement and better student outcomes. If you have strong family liaisons, they're going to be relationship builders. They know how to build trust with families better than anyone in the school. And this is so important for newcomer families. And while a liaison doesn't necessarily have to be from the same background as the family that they're supporting, it is a bonus if they are. So for immigrant or refugee families, liaisons really can help them navigate all the complexities of a new educational system. They can provide guidance on enrolling their children in different activities. They can help them understand report cards, progress reports, or even help them set up parent teacher conferences. In many of the schools that I've worked at, in all of my experience as a counselor, parent liaisons, family liaisons, they become the strongest advocates for their families because their entire focus is on that, on understanding the unique needs of each family, the challenges that families are going through. And I think that they're a huge asset to have. Oftentimes, when family liaisons build strong relationships with families, the families they will directly call the liaison before they call the school to tell them things like they're moving, or we've had families call our liaisons to say, I don't have money for rent this month. I don't know what to do. We don't have food this month. I mean, they get a lot of great information. So, a strong family liaison within a school is a very powerful tool. All right, another powerful initiative are family workshops. This is a wonderful way for families to better become acquainted with how school works, with the practices that are in a school. It really gets them engaged. And schools can really be creative. They can be so creative on how to host these. For example, as a counselor, we did family workshops on helping parents cope with their child's anxiety. We did stress busters for families. We did parent workshops on time management. And we really would try to be thoughtful about when we would have these workshops. So for some families, it worked really great. It's great if you can offer multiple time slots if your schedule allows. Like, for example, in 1 month, you can do 4 workshops, but at different times. So sometimes we would do it right first thing in the morning when they would drop their child off to school. The workshop would be right after students are settled in their classroom. Then the parents would come into another classroom and we would host a workshop or a coffee talk of some sort. Sometimes they work better right before dismissal so that then they can finish the workshop, pick up their children, and go home. And then obviously sometimes they work better at night when parents are off of work. I think it's good to do some data collecting to find out what works best for families. Don't just like host at a random time and then have no one show up, right? Families tend to come if you're offering a learning connection, an opportunity for them to learn something new. It's always really helpful if you can have food involved, and of course, allowing them to bring their children who are not necessarily school age so that they don't have to worry about childcare. This is really helpful for newcomer families. And another concept that I want to talk about is academic parent teacher teams, APTT. This is something that started in Arizona, and what it entails is that teachers invite all of the parents that are in their class at a one time, and they talk to the families about just like maybe one learning standard that they have for that year. And then they share with the families where the class is or where their child is on this specific learning standard. And then they share that with the parent and they offer the specific data to families. And then they create goals together with the family on each specific child. And they give the parents specific strategies and activities that they can do at home to build on this one standard. They may give them learning kits, they may send books home, but this is such a powerful tool that's been used because, again, parents and families want specific tools on how they can help their children academically succeed. And this is such a powerful tool. Like the teacher puts in this time in the beginning of the year, but they build on it. And at the end, the results are really great because they have this great partner at home helping them on this specific standard, whether it's like a reading goal, whether it's a math goal. You can tailor it to each child. But this is a really unique strategy. You can learn more about it. It's called APTT. And again, it started in Arizona. All right. Some additional family engagement tools that I wanted to talk about are, sorry, I'm having a little glitch on my slide here, are family engagement toolkits. The dual capacity framework model has its own toolkit that is available, but this is a great resource for schools to utilize because it really goes into lots of detail about different initiatives and activities, and it provides you with your own sort of framework on what to utilize in a school. Family resource centers are wonderful. Sometimes these are community based, but sometimes they're school based. In the district that I worked in, we had our own family resource center, and this resource center offered lots of different workshops for all types of students and families, whether they're migrant students, whether special education students, ELL students, general education students. But there was this constant hub, this place where families could go to, where they had library, where they could check out books, where they could attend trainings, whether they could talk to family resource specialists. And that's a very powerful thing. That's more of a district-wide resource to have if you have the funding available for that. Some school districts partner with family reunification programs to offer sort of tailored training and services on families who are reuniting after being separated, and they really bridge that gap into the school and provide supports within the school. Of course, we gave lots of examples of workshops that offer parenting classes that build on a specific skill for parents or something that they might need help in. I think that's a really good area to, again, collect data from what are parents needing support on? Where do we need to build that capacity? Providing some sort of monthly activity calendar to families is very helpful. Make sure that they know well in advance what types of engagement activities and opportunities are being held at the school. Give as much headway time as you can. I think schools nowadays are doing this earlier and earlier. I'm already getting activities for my entire year of my children that they're starting school next week. And I'm getting already like a calendar for every activity, like in terms of workshops and parenting that are planned. So that's insane that if you can give that leadway, that's great. And then family events that are hosted at schools, that can be very wonderful too. We had a program at one of the schools I worked in where we offered free adult English classes to newcomer families. And the wonderful thing about this program is that it was held once a week and it was during the time where their children were attending class. And so they didn't have to worry about that childcare. They were learning English. And then at the end of the course, it was like I think like a quarterly thing, so it was for 3 months. Then they would get to bring in foods from their culture, share things about their culture, and it was very empowering for families because they were able to connect with one another as well as the school. So letting them sort of host their own events and take onus of that is very powerful as well. All right, so how do we increase family attendance at these school events? So it's wonderful to have these events. It takes lots of time to plan events, but if we don't have enough attendance, then it's not going to, have the reach that we want it to. So, of course, making sure that we provide interpretation and translation. I've talked about that, but not just at the event necessarily, but in any correspondence that you're sending to families, in a letter or an email, make sure that it's translated in the family's home language. That's going to be very important. Making sure that it's kid friendly. So if you have the option to provide childcare, this really helps families. It ensures that they don't have to worry about bringing their smaller children along, and making sure that you involve community organizations can be helpful. It also helps family connect the dots. For example, when I was younger, we had the public library come in to the school and talk to families, and my family didn't know about the public library. They That didn't exist in Afghanistan. So my mom was like, "Oh, there's a place where you can go like get free books and check them out." And so she didn't know about that until she came into it was a back to school night event or something like that, and the library had like a little desk where you could make your own card. And so, really finding unique ways to bring in community is going to be helpful for newcomers because it shows them how everybody's sort of connected all around. And then of course, when we're working with URM, foster care programming, you have to make sure to see if there are other families in the same school district that could assist with carpooling or attending events together, to make sure that the URM students have an opportunity as well to participate. Obviously, you can't ask for the youth's names. And it has to be confidential, but just being able to connect foster parents to one another is really helpful and empowering to them. All right, so language access, interpretation, and translation. I think most of you know this, but it's really important to know that federal language access laws are there and they ensure that refugee families and anyone else who has a limited English proficiency have access to all the necessary language services so that they can participate in any educational program and service. So it's not just a best practice, it's the law, right? So we have to make sure that families who are English language learners have these resources available to them, and we need to be advocates and make sure that if they don't, that we are doing everything we can that they are able to get it. I know this is still a limitation for so many schools. All right. And now I have a little case scenario for you all about the Azad family. I'm going to read it and then we're going to have a Slido to follow on this. The Azad family are Afghan newcomers who recently moved to the United States. Their son Ahmad, 9, and daughter Amina, 6, are attending your school. They seem shy and appear to be struggling to make friends due to their limited English proficiency and cultural differences. The Azad parents are eager to support their children, but they feel overwhelmed by the new educational system and are unsure how to effectively navigate or how to effectively engage with the school. They have noticed that their children are becoming increasingly withdrawn and anxious about attending school. So we have one last Slido for you guys. What culturally responsive strategies or tools would you implement to foster effective family engagement for the Azad family? Okay, I see some answers coming in. Use a family liaison. Zoom meeting with parents, ESL classes for parents and children, support groups, communication with pictures, advocate and interpreter use, warm environment, encourage low impact engagement activities at first to start to feel more comfortable around the school and know who is at the school more. Take the family to meet the school counselor and discuss concerns. Family tree, phone call, interpreter. Have a community leader help with the school tour. Talking with parents and encouraging. After school programs to and bring in other refugee children. Thank you so much for those wonderful responses. I think lots of those can be utilized. A lot of the things that you guys said, there's not necessarily one correct answer to that. And it was nice to see you all responding with some of the strategies that we were talking about earlier. All right. So we have just a couple minutes, maybe for one or two questions from the chat. I'm going to check to see what we have here. There's a question about how can we engage families who are working 24 hours? They're so stressed out and they don't have time to do any activity. That's a great question, right? And so when we are talking earlier about low impact versus high impact, some of those low impact activities, while they're useful or helpful in some contexts, are not necessarily going to be helpful for newcomer families because things that are helpful for newcomer families is things that require less time and for them not having to necessarily always come into the school because we know some are working one, two, three jobs. They're adjusting to both spouses maybe working, whereas before maybe one was more available to be with their children. So it is difficult. But one of the examples that I gave earlier on finding ways where they can be part of their child's homework or helping their child with a specific project that they have. Or even the example I gave about the AAPT that I talked about that's utilized initially in Arizona, where if they learn about one learning standard that their child has and really helping ensure that their child is continuing to build on that knowledge in that one standard and that activity. Maybe it means reading their child a book at night or helping their child do a math problem from an activity that the teacher provides. That's still engagement, right? So engagement doesn't necessarily mean that the family's coming physically to the school. It means that they are partnering with the educators in their child's education. So there's different ways that we can go around that. All right, there's another question about can you talk about how to support teachers understanding how to read children's behavior when a child is under stress or not misbehaving? Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a wonderful resource for that within your school, there's sort of this is like there's different things you can do, but one of the biggest things as a resource is to talk to your school counselors, your school psychologists, any mental health support staff that you have at schools, because these are the people in the school who are trained to understand children's behavior at a higher capacity. And I think really leaning into those resources within your school and or whether having the people in that school provide trainings. Like I know as a counselor, we had a whole unified mental health team, and we would provide training to teachers in the beginning of the year on social emotional learning, on identifying possible trauma, on cultural humility. So really tap into those resources that you have within the school to help build capacity of teachers, because you're right, they're not necessarily trained on, and probably not on recognizing trauma And so utilize the resources you have within the school. But also, if you're a school that has a high level of students that have potentially faced trauma, make sure that you provide those professional development opportunities to your staff on identifying what those are so that they are well equipped. So that comes with PD and utilizing resources within your school. All right, so we are going to move on. If you have any other specific questions, please reach out to me through an email. And I would kindly request you guys just to take 60 seconds really quickly to do the survey that we have. You can scan that QR code. It is a short survey. It's going to really help us improve our training and technical assistance in the future. All right. I hope that our training today has been helpful to you all and that the three learning objectives that we had slated for you were met. Again, you will receive a slide copy of this deck and along with these recommended resources if you want to learn more and about family engagement. We have lots of other resources. And please stay connected with Switchboard. Reach out to us with any technical assistance requests that you have. Thank you again, and hope you all have a wonderful day.